identified that we were in front of national security. I think now those reflex would be much more faster. And yes, we can say that it should have been faster at the time, but going forward, the reflex will be faster in terms of making the links between those deficiencies, those conducts with national security.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Erskine Smith for final 5 minutes in this panel.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for attending today to you both. Mr. Vigneault, you've attended a couple of times, and I think I've canvassed all the questions I'm interested in canvassing with respect to Ms. Chu specifically. But I am interested, paragraph 21 of the June security assessment, it stood out only because we've just lived through a pandemic, but it says, Chu and other Wuhan Institute of Virology employees were approved by a Chinese evaluation committee to conduct a CIS high-end user nurturing project. That was between June 2019 to May 2021 is ostensibly the time period for that project. And that the project planned to use reverse genetics in order to create synthetic virus strains. This was to assess cross-species infection and pathogenic risks of bat filoviruses for future vaccine development purposes, which suggests that gain-of-function studies were possibly to take place. So I don't want to go down a conspiracy rabbit hole here, but I note that American agencies have said that lab leak is limited evidence, all things considered, but that is the most plausible reality here. But what should I make of this? Reading this, it certainly stands out, paragraph 21, in the context of having just lived through a pandemic. What should I make of it? What should parliamentarians make of it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would, for the record, I would say that I did not write this paragraph. That's why we employ people at CSIS who are much more intelligent than I would be to be able to make sense of this information. But seriously, Mr. Chair, is what I think is important here is to understand that the cutting-edge research that was being done at the National Microbiology Lab, as was mentioned by my colleague, is absolutely essential for Canada. And the fact that we had scientists working on these issues is in our own national interest. The problem, and the committee has been very clear in this issue, is that there were two individuals who lied to their employer and engaged in activities that were not that were against Canada's national interest. And I think this is where we need to, the complexity of the world of national security and of the world of international collaboration of science, these principles sometimes, will clash with each other. And this is only by having a very sophisticated approach and having a better understanding of how these different relationships will, and the different put and takes depending on the issue that will be assessed more in the national security, put more weight on this versus more weight on the international scientific collaboration. And maybe the last thing I would say to you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Erskine Smith, is that we have Canada and CSIS have not concluded that the virus indeed jumped out of the lab, as others have said. And I think our intelligence community friends in the U.S. have a different perspective on this issue.
Well, my last question, and I got a minute and a half or so left, but did you read, you mentioned other security agencies in other parts of the world. Did you read this morning's explosive Washington Post story covering the global efforts from the security agency out of India?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have.
And for all of the time, and it's valuable time to spend examining the events that took place at the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg, don't you think we should spend as parliamentarians at least as much time on an international effort? I'm reading here, the operation was approved by the India's security agency's chief at the time. Modi's national security advisor was probably aware of it. It was related to an assassination attempt in the U.S., a successful assassination here in Canada on Canadian soil. Should we not spend at least as much time on an issue like that?
Mr. Chair, I will not be as presumptuous as to tell the parliamentarians what they should do, but I can tell you as the director of CSIS and with our colleagues in the national security and intelligence community in Canada, we are as concerned with many files The threat environment in which Canada is evolving right now is probably the worst that we've ever seen. And I think it is important that, all venues to discuss threats to Canada and what we can do about them, that we can find is probably time well spent.
And maybe, just maybe, Conservatives tripped over themselves a little too quickly in accusing the Prime Minister of misstating the facts when the facts are obviously clear sitting here today. Thank you.
And thank you to Madame Drouin and Monsieur Vigneault. Thank you for your time today. We will now pause briefly and begin our next panel in a few moments. So we resume. I'd now like to welcome our witness for the second panel, Dr. Matthew Gilmore, research scientist. Dr. Gilmore, you have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the invitation to meet with the committee this evening. I'm actually quite hopeful to share a perspective and help the committee in their goal to advance the management of this interface between national security and scientific research. I'm now based in the UK, and even just as early as last week, that the same issue was in the news, where there's discussion over this elevating expectation on national security and how that sits alongside the challenges that a lot of scientific institutes face to actually put that into place based upon their own expertise and the processes that they would feel more comfortable with. That particular example is with MI5 working across the board with all UK universities. Try and find that balance point between the values and practices that would be in place in universities and those expectations on national security. And there's a lot of discussion on the balance on how you still pursue things like the values of research integrity, open science, fair access to education, and in the case of universities, actual income generation in the form of tuition that are being collected from international students. So for myself, I think to achieve both, to have this interface between security and scientific innovation, it's essential that there's coordination between these authorities to work together. That scientists have the tools to recognize and then act when these threats are present, and then while still working to keep world-class research occurring within their facilities. Another example within the UK, this comes from 2021, with the funders from the institute that I'm at now, so UK Research and Innovation, they produced guidance called the Trusted Research and Innovation Principles. And that team holds an office and actively counsels UK research institutes on matters such as data security, protection of intellectual property, and consideration of different values of the nations that they might be working with. So going back in time, I had the extreme honor from 2015 to 2020 to serve as the Scientific Director General of Canada's National Microbiology Lab. That team it's an exceptional team, one that has, in collaboration with their partners across this country, with partners across the world, faced and tackled a lot of very challenging and complex public health issues. Now, to have these roles, to work at this interface of public health challenges at the global level, the team at the NML has to demonstrate their expertise in a lot of different scientific disciplines, such as infectious disease, but they also have to have a commitment to actively want to lead these particular responses. But it's not just the scientists at the NML, it's a very large team of hundreds of individuals. They're blessed with an engineering team that helps maintain the containment fields and make sure that when they have mobile labs that are going out into the field, that those are well-equipped teams. But it's the engineers and it's the administrative team as well, again, that make sure that the resources and the materials are available to those teams. So to have activities like working in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, to work on aspects like the chikungunya virus that appeared shortly after the close of the Ebola outbreak, to then into the COVID-19 response, where the NML worked hand in hand with the Canadian Provincial Public Health Laboratories, including in Ontario, to diagnose the first case within Canada. It takes a large degree of coordination amongst all those different disciplines within the building. This is a team that's very expert in consolidating around a particular position. I know one thing that's really dear to the team at the NML is their placement as a Category 4 lab within a downtown urban setting within Winnipeg. They've spent a lot of time to earn the respect and the pride of the city of Winnipeg, because that's part of the community to which they activate, that they operate in. And I know for the team that biosafety is one of their top values, that they've got a profound understanding of risks for both themselves as the scientists that are working on these viruses and the risk for the community they're in. So going towards 2018, to the credit of CSIS, they were increasing the awareness of these foreign interference risks. And they were working with frontline actors like us at the National Microbiology Lab to make sure that we had awareness of these different risks. Because certainly for ourselves, again, the focus that we would have would be effective public health responses, and it would be things like the biosafety. Much less so at that time, it would have been awareness of foreign interference risks. So we were getting help from CSIS. I'm probably can comfortably say that scientists still need help to manage those risks. So I'm appreciative of the committee's work in that regard. Going back to the UK, there's a lot of active work between lawmakers, policymakers, to find that balance on how to have that coordination, that collaboration between national security and scientific interests. And for me, I think it takes expertise in the practices from both of those fields, security and science. They can actually find that balance and find that harmony where you still have productive, inspired, and yet safe science. So I'm pleased to be here tonight, and how can I help?
Thank you very much, Dr. Gilmore. We'll now go to Mr. Chong for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Gilmore, for appearing here. In the documents that we received from the government, you expressed concerns in some of those documents about the transfer of Ebola and Hennepin viruses to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Those viruses were actually shipped out in late March of 2019. Why were you concerned about these shipments to the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
So the basis of my concern wasn't the scientist within the NML. The basis of my concern was actually the recipient laboratory. I'd have the privilege over the course of my 5-year term at the NML to co-chair the Global Health Security Action Group Laboratory Network. And that was a G7 plus Mexico network where all the directors of the different high containment laboratories would come together. For the most part, it was a network of trust and awareness that you needed to have people that you could work with when issues and crises arose. That you had someone at the other end of the phone that you could talk to. And so we met at least twice per year at these different institutes across the world. And so that was a major component of my own awareness of how other laboratories operated. And obviously this particular laboratory is not within that network. So I had very little awareness of the activities in that particular lab. And so that's where I put the question back to my team to make sure that they went through all of their process, all of their due diligence to actually to ensure a safe transfer.
Now, this network of labs in the G7 plus 1, as you call it, the G7 plus Mexico, I take it that these are all level 4 labs that you are talking about?
For the most part.
Yeah,
not all of them have active functional level 4 labs, yeah.
And I would assume that it's at least a network of a dozen or more labs, because I assume that there's at least 2 or 3 level 4 labs in the United States. And so collectively we're talking about a dozen or so level 4 labs whose heads of labs would come together to collaborate and work on.
These were the public health laboratories.
Yeah.
There's a similar network for the animal health category 4.
Okay, I understand. And the Wuhan Institute of Virology was not part of this G7 plus 1 network. Yeah. Okay. Second set of questions. You first raised the first red flag in August of 2018. That culminates in an investigation and the walking out of the 2 scientists from the lab on July 5th, 10 months later, of 2019. And then subsequent to that, there are 2 CSIS security assessments that are conducted, reports that are produced, one in April of 2020 and the other in June of 2020, about 12 months later. Why did it take so long, first, for the 2 scientists, for the lab to be secured, for them to be walked out of the lab on July 5th, 2019? And secondly, why did it take an additional 12 months for these 2 CSIS security assessments to be concluded? Like what? It seems like it takes an awful long, a lot of time to get things done.
So I absolutely agree that timing is key here. And that this is what's important to me in the messaging here today, is that the coordination between science and security is going to be effective to actually rapidly detect and then act upon these particular threats when they appear. I know in the context of what we're discussing here now, I certainly wouldn't characterize that the lab was insecure. We didn't have any suggestion or any direction that these individuals needed to be removed immediately, that there wasn't any suggestion or direction to not have them retained in the lab, still doing some of the work until that moment in July. And for myself, the two CSIS letters that you're speaking of, I only read those within the last week as related to the release of documents.
So you agree, though, that it took too long for this process to unfold, that if we, that in the future, that this should happen in a much shorter time frame. Would you agree with that?
In the future, absolutely should happen in a shorter time frame. And when you apply hindsight in this particular scenario and you actually look at the circumstances of what was going on, this is an era where these parties are all gaining awareness of this, and this is a public service department that at the outset is applying public service principles to the investigation.
I have another question for you. You've spent now 4 years in the United Kingdom working in their scientific community at a lab. Prior to that, you spent years working in the Government of Canada in a scientific environment. Can you compare and contrast how the British treat national security and scientific research and how we treat it here?
Well, in the UK, there's a variety of examples that I can provide to the committee in terms of the actual, these policies and guidelines, and in some cases even laws where it's in place to scrutineer.
Is it more effective, and if so, how so?
I don't know if it's more effective, because again, this is something that's still in the discussion point within the UK. Certainly, the amount of guidance that is available, I think, is elevated. That's just a trend within the UK, is that they don't leave anything unwritten. That if anything's important, there's going to be the corollary policies, guidelines, if not laws, related. And I think in this scenario, you can find multiple examples.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chong. We'll now go to Mr. Nakvi for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Dr. Gilmore. Thank you for presenting yourself at this committee. Let me go to a very direct question. Some members have been suggesting that there was a connection between the dismissal of the two scientists that are part of this inquiry at the National Microbiology Lab, and you leaving for the UK when you joined the Quadrum Lab. So I'm going to ask you directly, did you leave PHAG or resign from PHAG to take a new role at Quadrum Institute in 2020? Did you resign?
Mr. Chair, it's a fair question. Yes, I did resign, but the reasons for my resignation were different. I just had one of these rare moments in one's life where there was the perfect opportunity for myself professionally and personally. The roles that I have in the UK exactly meet my interests and my skill sets, and I've flourished there in that particular role. And my family, my young family that moved there with me, we flourished as well. So at the end of the day, it was ultimately a personal decision, and it's one that we've had zero regrets over.
Thank you, Dr. Gilmore. I'm really sorry that I'm asking personal questions, but I just wanted to make sure that there's transparency and clarity in this committee. So just to clarify, the dismissal of the two scientists had nothing to do with your resignation.
No, and also they weren't dismissed at the moment of my resignation. They weren't. I think I found out about it just probably as most people did, multiple years after.
So you made a personal decision in terms of your career and your family, and opportunity that came up in UK that you felt was the right one for you?
Mr. Chair, I'd agree with that.
Great, thank you very much. Let me go to a second set of questions, and that's in regards to international collaboration in scientific research, something that we've been discussing a lot, and of course, very much part of it. And I think you've got some unique experience and expertise that you can offer to us. Let me start by asking you the question: is it common for international laboratories to collaborate on research?
The sharing between institutes is not just the materials that would be transferred back and forth. It's the expertise, it's the lived experience, it's epidemiologic information, it's metadata. There's a variety of requirements that you have to have for successful science, and that would have been one of the other bases for that the laboratory networks that we had both internationally and within Canada. Certainly for a group like the National Microbiology Lab, there's no way to act in isolation, and it's why their principal mandate is working with the other 10 provincial public health laboratories across the country. And again, that's the success is entirely dependent upon free flow of information around a particular issue.
And what's the importance here in terms of importance to science? I'm thinking in terms of this extensive collaboration that you're speaking to on an international scale. What's the opportunity for countries, for scientists from different places, different backgrounds to collaborate on scientific research?
Mr. Chair, there's a variety of options, or sorry, there's just a multitude of ways that obviously people can collaborate. I know from the UK, especially under the lens of national security, they've calculated that probably at least about half of all scientific collaboration in the country is founded in some degree in international collaboration. Again, you cannot rely strictly upon your own expertise and your own materials. There has to be benefit sharing between different institutes.
And in terms of Canada, how do you think Canada is doing on international collaboration in public health? Are we an important player?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. That's another complex question, but I know Canada is well respected in terms of its microbiology expertise, of its virology expertise, of its roles in the study of the transmission of antimicrobial resistance. So in the field that I work in, yes, absolutely respected.
My last set of questions, and obviously I'm time dependent, is what you started talking about when Mr. Chong was asking you around the coordination between science and security. Would love to hear you elaborate on your understanding of this enhanced nature of coordination between science and security. I think you also alluded that we're of course learning over time, and hindsight is a great way of learning in terms of what we knew before and during the pandemic, and now, and even UK is sort of working through that process. Can you elaborate, in your view, as a scientist on an international scale, what that coordination looks like between science and security?
Mr. Chair, a really good example, again coming from the UK, is where security authorities have co-developed with scientific institutes guidelines and practices. An example is actually coming from the National Protective Security Authority, where they have, again, co-developed pieces with science that tries to marry that the aspects in the UK where academic research is enshrined into law, yet recognizing yes, the majority of collaborations are international, and there is this elevated expectation on security. So there's active co-development of it in the UK.
Thank you, Dr. Gilmore. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes. Okay, I was going to ask how your French was, but your earpiece will do quite nicely. I'll just let you get set up there.
Ça va de votre côté? Vous avez la traduction?
Okay, can you hear the interpretation? The interpreter's on the air now. If you have the right channel, you'll be okay.
but I won't.
Est-ce que vous avez maintenant la traduction?
Do you have, you hearing the interpreter now? Yes, working. Well, Mr. Gilmore, thank you very much for appearing tonight. Last year, the Minister of Health and you declared that in 2018 we worked in cooperation with China to develop therapies and interventions against Ebola. Why was it essential that Canada should be working in collaboration with PRC? Why not with one of the network of laboratories in the G7? Why China?
China over the course of the Ebola virus work, but certainly in general, internationally, there would be coordination and collaboration on this because, of course, for most countries, this fortunately is not a virus that is native to your country, so it's something that you have to work with other countries to obtain and work on. But I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the specific project being discussed.
Ben, j'aurais cru que vous...
Well, I would have thought that you would be informed of this cooperation because we sent to the PRC specimens of Ebola virus. And if we sent these Ebola samples to China, it's because they didn't have any, they had none. So why would it be necessary to work with China on a virus such as Ebola?
The rationale for working with them is just part of that international expectation of that benefit sharing. Again, for those that don't have access to these viruses, if you're in a position to share, that would have been the ethos at the time. And again, within the laboratory, in terms of due diligence on the process, it would have been almost entirely a biosafety consideration. So I think within the documentation that was released within the package of documents, like it seemed like the final 100 pages was all about the documentation that the NML produced in terms of, again, their own due diligence in fulfilling their own processes in terms of the checks and balances.
Dr. Gilmore, I'm pausing just for a second. You tend to drift off microphone a little bit, so if you could just aim right down in there, that would be great. Or just shift it over depending on which side of the table you're speaking with, okay? Very good. Mr. Bergeron, you can continue now.
Vous a-t-il traversé l'esprit...
Did it strike you that China may have wanted to have this Ebola to eventually perhaps create a biological weapon?
That specific concern, sir.
Okay. Toujours le 8 avril...
Now, the Minister of Health at the time confirmed that the Winnipeg lab was not cooperating with individuals or stakeholders within the PRC. Now, when he appeared before the special committee on the 19th of April, Dr. Poliquin, who occupied the position that you did in the past in lab, international cooperation is essential for the progress of the research. Now, if we're going to reconcile that we cooperate or collaborate with the Chinese because it is essential to the advancement of the work, the research. Do you think that this was for the advancement of the science in China or in Canada?
I would reiterate that it was just part of the just the overall ethos and the culture scientifically for that benefit sharing where possible, but with the checks and balances that I mentioned.
Monsieur le Président, en respect...
Mr. Chairman, with all respect for our witness, I'd like to take a few moments to propose a motion for our colleagues here, which we'll eventually discuss. that given the May 22nd 2-2, the motion to normalize our relations with PRC should have before the June the Minister of Environment, Deputy Minister of External Affairs, the Ambassador, Canadian Ambassador in China, and representative of the Canada-China group.
But we will need it in both official languages, too.
Absolument.
All right, very good. You can continue with your questions. You have 1 minute.
Ça va être, j'ai complété pour l'instant, Monsieur le Président.
Well, I've had my turn as far as it goes for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Very much. Ms. Barron, you won't be splitting time with the cat, I trust. And we will not,
Chair.
We will not talk about fish. Ms. Barron and I serve on Fisheries and Oceans together. But you have 6 minutes or less.
That's right. Yes, apologies. My cat wanted to join the meeting. Thank you to our witness for being here today. Happy to be here to ask a few questions on behalf of my colleague who's unable to be here today. My first question, Mr. Gilmore, is just around I apologize that I came in a little late, so if you're repeating this, perhaps you can expand on a little bit. But what are your thoughts around the ways in which we could avoid the same problems from occurring again? What are some of the learnings that we could take from this that you might be able to share with us?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. One of the examples that I haven't yet mentioned, again, drawing upon some of the practices within the UK, is that there's a program there called the Academic Technology Approval Scheme, and this is integrated just right at the national level, and it's integrated in with the visa scheme. So as people apply to visas from non-exempt countries, Canada would be an exempt country, but as people apply for visas into non-exempt countries for certain categories of work, so where the security agencies have identified particular categories of work that are concerned to them in terms of, to the previous member's question, things related to for example, bioterror, that's built right into the visa application scheme, that some of that vetting. So it's not happening closer to the front line within the actual departments or within universities, but it's happening at the outset as people are coming into the country.
Interesting, thank you. The PRC's Thousands Talent Plan, I was learning about as one of of an estimated 200 talent recruitment program that is used to incentives such as salaries, research funding, and lab space to encourage Chinese researchers abroad to transmit knowledge to the PRC, as you know. And I'm wondering if you can share to what extent are the PRC's talent recruitment program a threat to Canada's national security, or is it?
Mr. Chair, my own specific awareness of these programs is quite low, because it's not something I have to deal with in my day-to-day job anymore. Certainly, going back in time to my time within the National Microbiology Lab, I had periodic engagements with an individual's CSIS agent from the Winnipeg office, where we were mutually developing a little bit of awareness. So him showing me things that would come across the wire that were of interest or concern to them, and then kind of trying to ask for my reflections in terms of what they might have meant. It often meant actually talking and educating a little bit about the science of what they were looking at. And I should clarify, in those meetings we weren't talking about anything specific at the NML, but it was just their own process of, again, generating awareness in myself and some of the security pieces. I don't, to my recollection, things like education on the talent management programs, that didn't actually occur until that August 2018 meeting. So I've had limited exposure in terms of analysis of those. So I apologize to the member.
No, thank you so much for clarifying through the chair, Mr. Gilmore. Mr. Gilmore, under what circumstances and what conditions would you consider that the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg should be resuming collaborations with entities and individuals in the PRC?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I'm in a position to speak to that because I don't have a role within the Government of Canada anymore. But I certainly do hope, and again, judging by the conversations from the witnesses that preceded me, it sounds like the level of interaction and engagement between the leadership team at the NML and security authorities is greatly heightened, and I was very pleased to hear that.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, perhaps you could clarify how much time I have left before I continue.
Minute and a half.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. In my last time here, perhaps I'm going to go a little high level just because I'm not a regular member here, but what are some takeaways that you can share with us as a committee, Mr. Gilmore, in your role that is essential that we take with us in our continued work?
Mr. Chair, my takeaways are that the conversations between security and the specialized scientific institutes needs to be very active. It needs to be very profound. This can't be something that's left to just a background conversation. And again, it's one of the reasons why I was pleased to hear that this sounds like this is happening now between the agencies, the security agencies, and the management team at the Public Health Agency Canada and NML.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gilmore.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. Mr. Cooper, now 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Gilmore. Dr. Gilmore, knowing what you know now, do you think it was a good idea for the Winnipeg lab to transfer Ebola and Hennepin to the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Mr. Chair, I can absolutely see how in the light of 2024 that there would be concerns over the transfer. Certainly at the time, though, we were acting upon the information that we had and acting under a different operational tempo where the concern, as I stated before, was assurance on things like biosafety.
And it was a highly unusual transfer. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, it'd be difficult for me to say if it was highly unusual. Certainly the transfer of materials between different laboratories would happen on a regular basis.
This type of transfer didn't typically occur with PRC laboratories, did it?
Mr. Chair, I think that's best coming from the current employees of the NML. I don't specifically recall. I think it would have been a very low incidence, if at all.
Low incidency of that type of transfer of materials to PRC institutions.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. On March 27th, 2019, days before the transfer, you sent an email to Steve Gershu, the executive director of the Winnipeg lab, in which you stated, quote, "I'd like you to be comfortable with this before it goes out," end of quote, being the transfer of Ebola and Hennepin. Why did you send that email to Mr. Gershu, and did it have anything to do with the fact that 4 days earlier, PHAC obtained a fact-finding report that raised serious concerns about Dr. Chu's activities, who was directing this transfer?
Mr. Chair, it's a very good and very valid question. I remember again that the nature of my concern. So that email was a follow-up to my original email that had been sent to the team, where I explicitly said that I had a concern, and I had outlined the natures of my concern, and those were all the concerns were about the validity of the recipient. It wasn't about who within the team was initiating the transfer, and so that email to the executive director was a reiteration to make sure that we had, as a team, done all of our process to make sure that we had gone through the due diligence.
So the fact-finding report of March 23rd didn't raise additional red flags with you or anyone at the lab? And I understand that we learned a lot more, but at the time, PHAC knew that she had was registered on a PRC patent. There were multiple policy breaches. There was the unauthorized transfer of materials to the PRC, and there was evidence of collaboration with the PRC, and this again is Canada's highest security lab. So surely there must have been additional red flags.
Mr. Chair, it's very conceivable that would have been a red flag. I certainly remember at the time that the nature of the concerns over the individuals, as you stated, was it evolved to something completely different. And at the time, the level of concern was much lower, potentially even things that we could manage within the lab.
I find it respectfully concerning that it took 3.5 months before she and Dr. Cheng were finally marched out of the lab. You met with Dr. Chu on June 19th. What happened between the receipt of that fact-finding report, your meeting on June 19th, and then July 5th when they were finally escorted out?
Mr. Chair, my memory was a discussion with the senior executives within the Public Health Agency of Canada on how to initiate what was ultimately the administrative investigation. So it was orchestration of how to actually introduce this to the employees' supervisors and then to the employees themselves on the 5th of July.
Were additional facts gathered between that time about the activities of Dr. Chu and Dr. Cheng? I mean, there's just a big gap in the documents that we have between this fact-finding report and then July 5th.
Mr. Chair, it's a challenge for me to fill that gap for you. In my own review of the documentation, I didn't see anything missing in terms of additional investigations. And again, these were investigations that were done by other authorities. So,
which I think would underscore why I would submit action should have been taken on or around March of 23rd of 2019 and not July 5th.
Mr. Cooper, I'm sorry, your time has run out. We'll go to Ms. Yip now for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for staying so late. Are similar research organizations in the UK working on collaborations with the PRC?
Mr. Chair, sorry, just to clarify, similar organizations, so the other public health laboratories?
Yes.
I'll have to admit, I'm not an employee of those organizations, so I couldn't speak to that.
And your own organization now that you've joined?
It's not something I've done a review of, so.
In your opening statement, you spoke about the balance point of scientific innovation and national security. And knowing what has transpired, is there anything in hindsight that you might have noticed that would have tipped the balance point?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can I hear the question again, please?
Okay. So I'm asking, in your opening statement, you mentioned about the balance point, right?
Yeah.
Of scientific innovation and national security. Was there a time when you worked with the lab that this was tipped? Could you see warning signs, red flags?
Mr. Chair, so the warning flags or red flags would have been the ones that amounted to the disclosure or the discussion with CSIS in August 2018. So some of those warning signs were the affiliation with Chinese institutes. It was a frequent travel to China, and it was the issues that were uncovered related to visiting scientists that were not always supervised. Those were issues that very near the same time were issues that we were discussing within the management team. So when presented by CSIS on August 2018, that's where I reciprocated that these were things that were of growing concern to us.
Did you do anything different, knowing what you know now?
Mr. Chair, another good question. This was been part of my own reflection, even this last week after having read all of the documents. I'm not sure if I mentioned before, but to my knowledge, the April 2020 and then the June 2020 CSIS reports, those are not things I had seen before, and explainable that I hadn't seen them before because I think I'd already resigned from the position by that point, so I wouldn't have expected the employer to show those to me. Probably the one regret I might have is would I have had a role in following up with CSIS more actively myself? That's a question I ask myself.
And I guess you don't have any answer to your question.
No.
You've testified at the Health Committee during your previous role at PHAC on the important work that NML does, including diagnostic support, research studies into therapeutics and antivirals, transmission modeling, and more. Can you speak about the role of the NML in the context of new emerging viruses and pathogens of concern?
It's Mr. Chair, it's one of the rationales for the existence of the laboratory is that you have a safe place to bring in any clinical material when a new disease is emerging, where the safety profile at the early outset is unknown, that you can put it into a Category 4 or a Category 3 lab as you see fit, and do the work to actually characterize it and understand the nature of that emerging organism. It is one of the key rationale for having a laboratory like the NML in Canada.
How much time do I have left?
You have 40 seconds. What can you do in 40 seconds?
Okay. What are your thoughts on AI and the role it plays on national security?
Mr. Chair, just very quickly, my own thoughts on AI is that it's a very powerful tool, at least for information gathering. That you can scan public data sources, you can scan other literature, and with natural language models actually very accurately recover the information that you're seeking. So if whether you're a scientist, whether you're a security firm, whatever your interests are, you can use these tools to actually, at least at the outset, very robustly get the information you need. At this time, it's probably still very much a human interface to actually synthesize all that into a compelling narrative. But at least it's a very powerful tool for information gathering.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. Mr. Bergeron, you have 2.5 minutes. You're
Aucune
good.
question, Monsieur le Président.
No further questions. I'm good.
Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, I will gladly call our witness by the proper name of Dr. Gilmore. Apologies, Dr. Gilmore, I am for not saying doctor in my first round of questions. Dr. Gilmore, I wanted to ask you about, now, I'm not sure, honestly, if my colleague had a chance to ask you this or not, so, but I do want to know, why did you leave your role as the scientific director general of the Winnipeg lab? What was the reasoning behind that?
Mr. Chair, no concerns at all about the salutation. It's even later than you can imagine for me with a little bit of the jet lag. So I did not notice what you called me. But the question was asked and answered in terms of my departure, and the short answer, just for your own benefit, is that an absolutely dream opportunity came available to me with colleagues that I already knew and respected, and it was just the right fit for me personally and then professionally.
Okay, thank you. That helps me. I'm wondering, in your time in your position, if you felt that you had the proper tools to be able to prevent foreign interference. I know you spoke a little bit about in your previous round of questions around whether there were any regrets, and I'm wondering if you felt that you were equipped with the proper tools to be able to identify concerns and to be able to respond accordingly.
Mr. Chair, that is probably the most powerful question I've heard tonight, and I actually want to go back to Mrs. Yip's question of in terms of if I had any regrets, and I think I answered maybe more conversation with CSIS, and I think that so in terms of whether I was equipped or not, that's a challenge to answer, but certainly going back in time. Yes, there absolutely should have been more briefing, more planning, more conversation between myself, with CSIS and the departmental security officer. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. That's pretty much your time there. We'll go now to Dr. Ellis, followed by Mr. Fragastatos, and that will wrap up this panel. Dr. Ellis?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Gilmore, for being here. My colleagues started talking a little bit about the time frame between the end of March 2019, when the infamous shipment happened, and then the administrative action, which happened to Drs. Chu and Cheng in July of 2019. So in that time, we have 3 months or so, and as you said, there didn't appear in your mind, at least, that there was more information available, but you were having conversations about what to do with these individuals. So who were the conversations with?
Mr. Chair, so those were conversations with the senior executive of the agency. So that would have been, in my case, I can at least recall conversations with like the vice president of the Infectious Disease Prevention and Control Branch, conversations with probably at least one other VP within the corporate services. I don't recall if there was conversations with the president. That's just my own fallible memory on this. But this again is an agency that found itself in a relatively unfamiliar territory and probably remarkable territory in terms of what they had experienced in the past. So on one hand, there's a lot of credit to the agency, I think, here for actually earnestly putting forward due diligence in terms of actioning those fact-finding reports, and then moving towards what was ultimately the administrative investigation. But for me, I firmly recall, again, from a public service perspective, this is not your normal HR process, and that would have been a struggle for the executive. So.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, was the Minister of Health made aware during that time, to the best of your knowledge?
Mr. Chair, I am not aware of that happening. Those were not conversations I was privy to.
In your mind, I mean, you were the Scientific Director General, of course. Do you think the Minister of Health should have been made aware at that point in time?
Mr. Chair, it's a good opinion question, one that I honestly haven't actually reflected on until you're asking it. Yes.
Thank you for that. Going back to your original contact with CSIS in August of 2018, for all intents and purposes, that's really what started the ball rolling, if I might use that term here. Can you please elaborate to the committee what your concerns were that you relayed to CSIS at that time?
Mr. Chair, so I remember the session. One, it was starkly different because I transitioned from just having one-on-one briefings with an individual agent kind of sporadically over time. And if I recall correctly, I think this was the first kind of group session where there was multiple CSIS agents presenting kind of a prepared presentation and describing some of the tactics and approaches that would be used in the PRC, so things like talent management programs, the due, or I suppose undue consideration of intellectual property protection. And I recall at the time that some of the tactics that they were describing were familiar to some of the same concerns that we had, I think, very recently started to talk about within the NML management team, again, including affiliations to Chinese institutes, frequent travel to China, and the number of visiting scientists, visiting students that were coming from that particular country. So it was a concern that we were discussing within the management team, and there it was in front of me within a CSIS briefing. So there was no compunction to withhold that from them. So we had a conversation about it.
Fair enough. And through you, Chair, Dr. Gilmore, when you talked about having those discussions amongst the management team at the NML, who else would that have included at that time?
Mr. Chair, I'd be challenged to remember the specifics, but I have to imagine at least the executive director.
So just the two of you would have had those conversations about Drs. Chu and Cheng?
Mr. Chair, I couldn't say if it was just the two of us.
Final question for you, Dr. Gilmore. You know, obviously you had concerns about the shipment going to the Wuhan lab, which was a new actor in the laboratory scene. A level 4 lab didn't exist in China before Dr. Chu helped it come into being. Why didn't you stop the shipment?
Mr. Chair, I think as other members had questioned, I did express concern, and I expressed concern at multiple points.
But you could have
But
stopped.
I didn't stop the shipment because for myself, that would have meant overriding my team, overriding their expertise, overriding their processes, and that's the process that we had at times. So I didn't override it.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis.
Thank
We'll
you.
now go to Mr. Fragaskatos.
Chair, in fact, I don't have questions, but my question, or my, yeah, I suppose it is a question. It's a question to you. I think that we've run the course here with respect to the topic, and I would just put to you when we could talk about drafting instructions, what the plan would be for that exactly.
We have received, further witness requests from Mr. Chong. One more witness, I believe.
No.
Now
It's 3 witnesses, 1 meeting.
Yeah,
and then,
as I understand it, the session that's scheduled for Friday, Richard Fadden is scheduled to appear.
Yep.
We have been attempting to line up Ms. Siddiqa Mithani, but we have not received a response. And then you came up with 2 more.
Yeah. We can get that all done on Friday if we could.
So Friday? And if we do that on Friday and we carve out some time for drafting instructions?
Sure.
That'll work?
Yeah, if
Sorry.
you wouldn't mind carving out drafting instructions next week after we had time to absorb today's testimony, Friday's testimony, and I don't think we need more than 30 minutes for drafting instructions.
Yeah, I would just say I wonder what the rationale, with great respect to my colleague, of course, is for having another meeting. We've had, by my count, 7 hours and 13 witnesses already tonight, not just on the government side. We've even had opposition member say that they've run out of questions. So this is, I'm not looking at you, Michael, but as I say, it's an opposition member who never tires to ask questions, and he always asks very good ones. So I make the point again that I think we've run the course on the issue. And I don't know if Mr. Bergeron has a view on whether or not we need another meeting, or whether my colleague in the NDP has a view on the issue, but that's many hours, many witnesses, and I'm not sure what would be gained, frankly, most importantly, what would be gained by having another meeting on Monday.
Yeah, we did actually originally schedule 2 meetings, and I think we've been quite generous with our committee time. Mr. Chong?
Yeah, I'm asking for 1 more meeting. Dick Fadden is the former director of CSIS. I think he could add valuable insight into the timeframes that we have been investigating here, whether they were appropriate, whether they took too long, and what should be different. He's coming willingly, as I understand it, as a witness to our committee. So I think that is valuable testimony. And then the other 2 or 3 witnesses that we've invited actually were involved with the transfer of the viruses and the applications for the transfers. And so, and also the policies regarding restricted visitors to the lab. So I think it would be the final meeting. I waited 3 long years to get to this point, and that's, I think, just 1 more meeting, Mr. Chair, would be entirely appropriate, and then we could easily set some time aside. I don't think we need more than half an hour for drafting instructions, and then the study is largely done.
I want to not put them on the spot, but I'd like to hear from opposition colleagues, just because while Mr. Fadden is, yes, a respected former director of CSIS, we've heard from the current director no less than 3 times. So I don't know, with great respect, Michael, again, what we would gain by having Mr. Fadden come when we've already had the current director give lengthy testimony, including thoughts on recommendations on all of this. But that's, like I said, I'm not going to belabor the point here.
Mr. Bergeron, do you have any reflections that you care to offer?
Monsieur le Président.
Well, Mr. Chair, simply that we haven't provided any other list of witnesses, and we believe that we've had a good detailed examination of the issues. And if a colleague would like one for their meeting, I'm not particularly enthusiastic about it, but how could we, other than imposing a gag order or something, how could we not avoid having another meeting?
We know Mr. Fadden does intend to appear. If the others can be coaxed to appear, we've got a deal. If not, we wrap it on Friday. Okay? All right. Ms. Yip, you had something to?
Well, I just, in the spirit of, being fair, you asked Mr. Bergeron, but we didn't hear from, is it Ms. Barron for the NDP?
I think that would put Ms. Barron on the spot, given that she's had about an hour's experience. Ms. Barron, you had, have you heard from your whip, who actually, to this point, has been a regular member of this committee?
Thank you, Chair. The only information that I can contribute is that my colleagues are okay with going ahead with witnesses on Friday, and anything further I'll leave to my colleague to be able to answer those questions.
All right. Mr. Urson-Smith.
Apologies to the interpreters because I told them I wasn't going to talk, but I just so I'm clear, we meet this Friday as a final meeting. That's the meeting that Michael is requesting. And then, Chair, obviously you can take matters into your own hands. But my understanding from there would be we revert back the following week to a 3-hour meeting every Monday, and we do not have the 2 meetings a week. Is that correct?
That's correct. All right.
Thank you.
I didn't hear that. So that's the deal. We do meet on Friday. We'll get as many remaining witnesses as we can. We will carve off a little time next Monday for drafting instructions on this. I'm sure we'll have a very fulsome report to present to Parliament. Dr. Gilmore, thank you for your time, and thank you for making the effort to be here in person. I know that was a bit of a stretch to your schedule, but we appreciate it very much. And I will thank the interpreters, our staff, everybody who's made tonight possible. And with that, we will adjourn.